Get ready to be challenged to think about what you think about. Listen as Alison Donaghey, author, speaker, and creator of the My Part movement, challenges the status quo, inspiring us to live a free and empowered life through reconnecting to our inherent worth and supporting the understanding that we are responsible for what we do, what we think, and how we act. Join the movement. Now, here's your host, Alison Donaghey.
Hi, how's it going? I hope you're all doing really, really well and you're staying safe, healthy, and happy. I am Alison. I own Domino Thinking, and I'm excited about our guest today, talking about a really unusual topic. So definitely stay tuned because I know I am going to have so much to learn. I'm super curious about everything that Richard is doing, and I hope that you will be as well. So if you like what you are hearing, you can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, all of those fantastic spots, and let us know what you're thinking. And if you have any questions or if you have any topics that you want me to cover, definitely reach out. You can find me on my website, dominothinking.com. So what I want to do before we introduce Richard here is have a little bit of a thought opportunity. This is your opportunity to think about things, because I don't think we do nearly enough of that. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is what is your focus? So we can focus on three things. We can focus on what we had in the past, we can focus on what we have right now, and we can focus on something we might have. And as you can see, what we choose to focus on is really going to determine what our headspace is going to be. If you are constantly looking at everything that went on in the past, you are definitely going to stay in that situation where your past is owning your present. That every choice, every decision, everything that you do is going to be based on something that happened, which means the people in your past, the things that were said, the things that you saw, all of that, they're going to own your present. I don't know about you, but that kind of pisses me off. So I'm always kind of looking for ways to let the past be, so that it's not controlling my present. And we think about, like, yeah, it's great to have goals and everything, but damn, if you had a 5-year plan 5 years ago, would it have included COVID? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have. So sometimes we spend way too much time really focusing on what's going to be happening tomorrow, that we do not take that time to smell the roses today. And I would just encourage you to try to find some balance of all of it. Keep the good stuff from your past. Focus on that for sure. We're here to build memories. Really think about the future in terms of, this would be nice if it happened, let's head in that general direction. But don't get so caught up in that you're not focusing on today. And while we're at focusing on things, all of you Canadians out there, I'd highly suggest you start focusing on our politics and leaving American politics alone, because that's none of our business. We have no say, no control over anything that happens in the States, but there's crappy things happening here in our country right now, and it's high time we start paying attention. That is my little rant for the day. Actually, I'll probably rant about that more on Facebook later, because it is really, really, our government is trying to destroy our country and nobody seems to care. So I would be in my bonnet. Anyway, let's talk about Richard. Richard is the founder of Forever Homes for Foster Kids. It's a leading international authority on immigration issues and foster families. A proud Navy veteran, Richard has been featured on CNN International, Univision, AP News, ABC TV, Costco Connections, and The Washington Post. He is a columnist with Foster Focus magazine and an international speaker. For 25 years, his nonprofit has worked with government agencies across the country, reuniting immigrants and foster children with their families. So I am excited to talk about this. This is a topic I know nothing about, and I'm so happy that you're here with us, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. You know, we've been working on this for a year, haven't we, I think? Trying to get you on here, and the stars lined up, and I've got you now.
That's right. Persistence pays off.
That's right. Exactly. So tell me, like, what is this whole foster thing that you're working on? Like, how did it come about? How did this become something that you got interested in?
Well, there's actually two stories. One is I was very lucky early in life that I had a gentleman who was my mentor. This is someone who'd worked with, foreign governments, the Department of Defense. He was all over Latin America, Europe, doing multi-million-dollar deals. which doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but back then that was huge. Worked for Fortune 500 companies. Anyway, he was my mentor in doing business internationally. And one of the things that got me started into what I'm doing right now, which is locating and finding relatives for foster children, was one day he walked up to my desk, gave me this name, Barry. Yeah, I don't know last name. He said, look, this is Barry. He works in the Department of Commerce, a huge organization in the United States. He's in Washington, D.C. Great. See what you can do. Now, this is pre-Google. So that's it. He's like, give it your best shot. I don't expect anything. And he walks away. So later that day, I go to his desk and I drop off the piece of paper, and he turns it over and it's got a phone number. He says, what's this? I said, well, that's the information you wanted. And I'm ready to walk away. Job done. And he's like, no. I said, I don't understand. I said, well, this is the information you wanted. And he looks at his watch. He said, well, I asked you to get this for me 5 minutes ago. I said, well, yeah, I tried to hurry. He's like, no. You got to explain to me, how did you do this in 5 minutes? And I said, okay. You know how it is sometimes you're talking to someone, you're like, okay, I've done the job. I want to get back to my work. And okay. So I called Betty at the Economic Development Center. She got me over to John in DC. We talked for a minute. He got me to Suzanne, and she gave me the phone number. And for me, it's like, what else is there to say? And he's like, nobody does this. And I said, I do this all the time. And I'm walking away again. He says, you're not listening to me. And this was a huge life lesson. And I'll bet you some of your listeners have had that life lesson where somebody spoke up. And because they spoke up, they realized there's something that they were doing right or something that they were doing wrong in their life. And it made a huge change for that person. Mm-hmm. And that was one of my life pivots, was this comment, because I knew the man well enough to know, okay, I was missing a very important lesson. So I come back to the desk. All right, what am I missing? He said, you know my background. And as I explained, this man was in who's who of Latin America. He talked to some of the, top colleges in the world on international business. And he said, you know who I am? I said, yes, I do. He said, when I tell you that I have never met someone who can do what you just did, that means something. Mm. I was like, wow. Because for me, it was like, I do this all the time, but he was pointing out a skill I had, like a lot of people have, but we need someone to point out to us because it's so normal for us, we don't value it.
Yeah.
So that was huge for me, having someone point out that this was a valuable skill. And I had used it to find very important people in our business in Latin America. Fast forward to about 10 years ago, and a gentleman named Kevin Campbell calls me up. And I don't know, Kevin at that time. And he introduced himself. He said, look, I've created a program with the foster care system in the United States called Family Finding. And that's where a child comes into the foster care system, and we want to get them out of the system as fast as possible, because foster care in the United States was never created to be a long-term event for these children. And he said, so our idea is to get as many relatives together as possible, because usually somebody will want to step forward and take in the child. Okay. He says, and that's what you've been doing, but you've been doing that internationally in Latin America, finding people in countries like Mexico, Honduras. And I'm like, well, yeah. He said, do you know we have 90,000 foster children who are of Hispanic ancestry, whose relatives are not in Europe, not in Asia, they're south of the border. I said, wow. And I had worked cases with foster children, but here was a man who said, we have a problem in the United States.
I just need to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, sure.
How do you get 90,000 Hispanic foster kids in a country when their relatives live outside of the country? How does that happen?
Great question. So a lot of people, when they hear that, first thing they're thinking is, oh, that must be all those kids I heard about crossing the border, all those immigrant kids. It's not. Research was done about 5 years ago that shows that the Hispanic children that are ending up in U.S. foster care, for the vast majority, they're They have parents who are both U.S. citizens, and they may have grandparents who are U.S. citizens. So they're second and third generation kids who are ending up in foster care. So it's not, again, this is one of those things that you have to understand, read between the lines. It's not like all those kids that we are hearing about coming across the border are ravaging and filling up our foster care system. It's not those kids.
So
it's just,
can I just get some perspective here? Because I don't want people walking around saying, oh, those damn Hispanics just can't take care of their own children. So can we get this in a bigger context? Like, how does this show up as foster kids in general? Like, what sort of percentage is this? And is it unusually high for Hispanics? And is there reasons for that? Just so that we can have maybe a more empathetic perspective when we're thinking about this.
Absolutely. So the majority of kids who are in foster care are Anglo, white. And then you have African American, and then you have Hispanics. Hispanics make up 21%. That doesn't seem to vary too much from year to year. Now, let's take in context that we've got about 54 million Hispanic, people of Hispanic ancestry in this country. 2/3 of those have ancestry from Mexico. So that means they could have an aunt, a grandmother, fifth cousin in Mexico. So again, this is a lot of numbers to throw out at people, but the big numbers to keep in mind is only 1 out of 5 of the children that are in U.S. foster care are Hispanic. That this is a country that has roughly 340 million, give or take. It's not an incredibly large number compared to the population.
So we're talking about Hispanics here simply because it's the work that you're doing across the border, not because they're the only ones in the system.
No, it's not because they're the only ones in the system. It's just because of my background and specialty that those are the ones that we end up working with.
Okay. Well, because you know what it's like, right? There is just so much information out there, and people just want to grab onto that one little bit and then distort it. And so what I'm really trying hard to create and be really conscious about in my own life is really getting to that understanding about why we are specifically talking about something, anything, whatever it is. Like, if it's not a gender issue, let's not make it a gender issue. So this is not a Hispanic issue. It just happens to be the demographic you're working with.
Exactly. I mean, if my specialty had been doing business in Asia, then I would be working with, Asian foster kids. It's just that these are the kids who, need the work that our charity does. They need our expertise because they, again, have relatives that are south of the border throughout Latin America, not simply just Mexico.
Right.
So,
thank you for being patient.
That's geography. Yeah.
While I did all that.
No, it's great questions because in the past, I might mention that we found relatives in Mexico, and the first thing we get questions like, so you're trying to ship kids to Mexico? No. You're trying to bring kids up from Mexico? No. You're trying to find relatives to go down to Mexico? I mean, we would get these really kind of crazy questions because that's where people would start thinking about, and they would totally bypass, we have a child. We have a child that's alone in a system. We have a child that's alone in a government system who could spend the next 10, 12, 14 years of their life separated from any relatives that they have anywhere in the world. That's a crisis.
Yeah.
And so it's, this is a good point to be making here so that people focus in on, we're talking about children.
Yeah. Yes, definitely a child issue. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to interrupt you. Carry on.
All right. So again, Kevin was talking about family finding. The family finding is a social term we use for identifying, locating, and notifying relatives. Real simple. So when a child comes into foster care, the machinery goes in action. They try to find all the relatives that are around and then to notify them. And then again, the idea is that someone will step up, a grandparent, an aunt, maybe an older sibling, and say, look, I'll take the child in. I'll get them out of the foster care system. I'll give them a stable life. I'll get them back to being a kid again and get them onto a better, brighter future. That's the goal. And what happens is that because we're dealing with Latin America, the information that these social workers have to work with is in Spanish. So they've got to read Spanish documents. Maybe those documents are written in a Spanish script, that cursive writing that no one does anymore.
I don't understand.
That's where we need our grandparents. Can you read this? I mean, it's tough, even for those of us who work in the industry. Then finding the right documents and knowing anything about the country. And that's before you even pick the phone up and try to call someone.
Yeah. Before we start talking, you speak 4 languages.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so this is something that really helps you in this industry that you're in to sort of bridge some of those gaps.
It helps tremendously because I have 20 plus years of international marketing background in Latin America. I've dealt with 95% of Latin America. I've got a book that I wrote years ago. It's in its 3rd edition. I've given seminars to major corporations like Plantronics, Thermo Fisher. I've had sponsors like Sprint, well, now T-Mobile. I mean, dealing with different cultures is huge. And having that expertise is something that allows our charity to do something that really other organizations can't do because it takes those resources.
Yeah. And understanding more than just the language, right? It's the customs, it's the culture, it's the nuances, all of that. Right. So I can understand how it could start getting really, really complicated. I have a hard enough time understanding people in my own culture without having to sort of understand all of those other idiosyncrasies.
Exactly. And this is why just because someone speaks Spanish and has a last name of Garcia doesn't mean that they know how to wheel and deal with the government agency in another part of Latin America. I ran into this years ago with a phone call from a gentleman in El Paso, right there on the U.S.-Mexico border. And he wanted my expertise to help him do business in Mexico. And I had to ask him, I said, why are you calling me? You're in El Paso. And he said, look, yes, I'm in El Paso. I have family across the border in Mexico. I go there all the time. I know what is going on in the city. I don't know how to do business. I don't know all of their business laws and regulations. He said, I need someone like you who can cut through all that and help me make money and be successful down there.
Right.
That was a very smart person because he realized his limitations in knowledge and he was going for getting the advice so he could be profitable in his business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's I think it's so easy to forget that these things are deep and they're multi-level. It's not just as simple as, oh, snap your fingers and it all gets done. So thanks for clarifying all of that and really drawing attention to the fact that nothing is as simple as what it seems on the surface. It's not as simple as what you're sending kids back. It's never just that. So all right, so you identify these children who are in the system. You are now going forward. You're figuring out how to connect with some of their relatives, and then what?
Well, once they're connected with a relative, again, the hope is that someone will step forward and will, take them into their family. Mm-hmm. Now, there's probably going to be someone listening right now who'll say, "Oh no, we're shipping kids who have spent 10 years of their life in the U.S., speak English. We're sending them across the border." Not happening. No, that doesn't happen. What we realized over a period of time is that the vast majority of our cases resulted in finding someone outside the U.S. who would then turn around and say, you know what, they've got 2 aunts living in L.A., call them. Here's the phone number. Or true case, we had 3 girls, 4, 8, and 10. Now, they were young enough that they knew they had 2 aunts living in Chicago, but that's all that they could tell the social worker. And the social worker didn't have enough information from any other relatives to be able to find these 2 aunts. So they did know that the mother had moved from the U.S. and moved to Mexico. So they came to us and said, look, can you find her family? And maybe we can do something here. Mm-hmm. So we spent a few weeks. We found the mother's relatives. So the caseworker on Saturday morning, she's there. She's got an interpreter with her so she can call, speak Spanish. She's ready. She's calling down to talking and gets the uncle. And she talks for a few minutes with the uncle and she says, we've heard about these two aunts living in Chicago. Do you know anything about them? And he says, well, wait a minute. And there's a silence on the phone. And then, well, half a minute later, a woman picks the phone up and says, hi, can I help you? And the caseworker explains who she is and why she's calling and says, do you know about these two aunts? And she says, well, I'm Annie. I'm one of the aunts, and my sister's in the other room. They had flown down and were staying with the family, and they were in the living room having coffee when this caseworker called down there to find out.
Wow, that's pretty serendipitous.
Oh, it was. The caseworker said she'd never had anything like that happen in 17 years of being in social work. It was just amazing. And
so, okay, so if you're trying to maybe reach relatives outside of the country to find relatives inside of the country, is there a risk in doing that perhaps you will expose family members that are here illegally or in the States illegally? I'm in Canada, so it's different, but.
Right. No, that's a great question. And it is something that does cross our mind from time to time. Unfortunately, we don't have much control over what happens because our work is we do the work, we do the research, and then we turn it over to the agencies because they have their own rules and regulations on how they want to contact the parents, the questions they want to ask, what their next steps are. And we work across the United States, so there's just no way for us to have that information on every county. And believe me, in California, you got 58 counties. They're all different. So there's just no way to know how each one of them works. So at that point, we pretty much hand the case off and they take over. But I will say this, as far as we know, we've never worked a case where the children left the U.S. It does happen, but mostly when they're in foster care, they're now away from the federal government. And so there are separations in there so that the likelihood that would happen is, I'll say, remote.
Right. So it's ships that pass in the dark.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not opening a whole new can of worms for them where they could inadvertently get deported because of whatever is going on. So that's good to know. And so it really is about making sure that these kids have a safe and secure and loving place because, foster care doesn't always have the best reputation.
Well, it doesn't. And let me address that. That's a great point. So for people who don't know how it is in the U.S., there are thousands of caseworkers out there who are dedicated, caring people who really want to do a great job and help these children. Now, just like any other industry.
I interrupt just for 1 second here because I know when it came out of my mouth, I was like, that is a totally unfair statement. However, it is one of those things that come to mind first. You hear about kids getting abused and they're there for the money and blah, 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 whatever, right? I had a foster care kid in my care for a few weeks last year, and it was a real eye-opening experience, that whole thing, and I certainly know it's not my cup of tea. However, and yes, I do agree that there are some really, really tremendous people, and this poor child went on to another home and it wasn't good care that they received. And so so when I say it, I do understand that there are really amazing, dedicated people, both fostering and working inside the industry.
Right. And just like any other industry, though, there are some people who should not be involved with children. And there are some people who they're burnt out. One of the things that's becoming more apparent in the U.S. is that we are just underfunding the activities here. We're expecting a lot and we're not willing to pay a lot as a society.
Yeah.
We have, state budgets that are being slashed because of the COVID. That's going to be a huge problem for next year. They're having to look at their budgets and see where they're going to cut. And of course, they're looking at things like, child welfare, foster care, which again, there's, with teachers, for instance, and I like, talking about teachers because it's pretty well established, 28, 30 kids in a classroom, that's pretty much the maximum. Not too many people are going to argue that they should have 35, 40 kids in a classroom with one teacher. Well, they can keep that going because they have a nice teacher union that's very powerful and it can keep those numbers down. Caseworkers don't have any of this. There is no one really fighting to say, look, there have been numerous studies coming out that say about 17 cases is the maximum. And that may not sound like a lot, but I just mentioned a case with 3 kids, and I just finished another case with 4 children. So in 2 cases, that's 7 children. You take 17, it's not 17 children they're dealing with. They're probably dealing with 25 already.
Right.
And again, they have to go visit the home. They have to do their paperwork. They have to be available for court. There's got to be some time in there for training. And we have this problem in the U.S. where we have caseworkers who are doing way, way too much that is humanly possible. And so children are falling through the cracks. Children are being hurt. They're in abusive situations where no one's noticing it. And so they're being hurt. And so there is a lot of things going on that do adversely hurt kids.
What you're doing too could help mitigate some of that, because if a child does end up in foster home and there is family that may not want them but stays in touch with them, that might create a safer environment for them.
Generally speaking, being with family is the best outcome. And just to let people know, 50% of children that come into foster care every year, they do go back to their parents. Their parents do get some kind of counseling. They go to workshops. And sometimes, this is not widely known, but sometimes kids are pulled away from their families and within a matter of days are returned. This happened in, I believe, Arizona, where they did an internal report in the state, and they found out that many of the cases of the children coming into foster care, the children were going back as quickly as 10 days because they had not gone before a judge. And that was one of the rules they changed. They said, look, you have to have a judge's approval to bring the child in, because once the judge was involved, the judge realized that there was not really a valid reason for pulling that child out.
Right.
The caseworker may have felt that there was a reason, but because of inexperience, and it's easy for caseworkers not to have experience because, quite honestly, there is so much turnover. You have caseworkers, again, dedicated, bright-eyed people coming in from college, and it's not like they have ongoing education. We already explained how their day is taken up, so they're not getting that ongoing education that we all get when we're in business. You have to have training, and they're not getting it. And then they get frustrated because they have too big of a workload. And they're frustrated because they realize that this is not good for the children. And then they burn out, and then they leave. And guess what? We get a new fresh batch of young people, and the cycle continues on. And that's a huge issue in U.S. foster care.
Humans, right? We're not dealing with 2 + 2. We're not dealing with this linear equation that we can all just sit back and solve the problem, right? We're dealing with all of these nuances and cultural stuff as well, right? Because that all plays a part. And I just see it as being such a challenging environment on just so many levels.
It is a challenging environment. And what you said about the culture is one of those issues, because, again, what they may be learning at college may not really be reflective of what they're experiencing at work. And doing international, if you're doing business domestically, locally, that's one thing. So just think about it. If you have a little restaurant and they're the popular restaurant in your town, your neighborhood, that's one thing. Try to have 5 of those restaurants in the city. That gets challenging. Now just try to expand that out to having restaurants throughout the state and then doing it nationally. Now let's take that internationally. And again, the rules of the realities don't change. It's going to take time. It's going to take planning. It's going to take process. And those are things that we don't really have in a foster care system. So a lot of times when people are looking at the system, we have a tendency to look at people and to place blame on people. And again, there are some people in the system, and I'm talking about the caseworkers, who have no business being around children. They really don't. Just as we have adults who have no business being foster parents or adoptive parents. Some adults are just bad people and should never be around children. But barring those,
background is in criminology. And so I got a job working at a federal halfway house. This is like 100 years ago. And when I started working, I was like, whoa, nothing in my education presented any assistance in dealing with the issues that was going on in a federal halfway house. And so I imagine a lot of the stuff that social workers are learning, and I've taken social work courses. And so, you know, I'm never was after my halfway house experience. I was never quite sure what I was learning was pertinent in the real world. And again, just one more layer of complexity.
absolutely. And that's true of social work. I mean, you never know what you're going to face. There's always so much, you know, kind of formal learning you can have to the real world learning and what's going on. And then adding that extra layer of culture, adding that extra layer of how to do this internationally. And that's where our charity comes in. We're able to
So cool.
bridge all that for these agencies and to, you know, make the connections that they're not able to make because they simply don't have the resources and the training.
Mm-hmm. So you just had a big win, right? That you were mentioned briefly before we got on air. Do you want to talk about that before we have to get going? Because we're going to run out of time pretty soon. But I would love to hear about it if you want to share it.
Yeah, we're very excited about this. We started working with Mexico, and we've done, you know, just hundreds of cases in Mexico, finding relatives over the years. But we've started expanding it out slowly to Central America, then the Caribbean, and now we're in South America. So we truly are a charity that's able to do work all throughout Latin America. And we just closed our first case where we were trying to find two parents who are living in Brazil. And they have a few children that are in the U.S. foster care system. And you know, these children, I can't say how long they've been separated from their parents, but you know, they've got a little one that's about you know, under 7 years old. So you know, that's very traumatic there. And so it's very important for them to find the parents, to find out if the parents, you know, want to be in these children's lives or they don't. You know, and that may sound harsh, but you know, for some children, it's better to know that their parents want to be in their life or they don't, and then they can go with someone who really wants to love them and give them that, you know, caring home.
So if I understand correctly, their children are in the States and the parents of these children are in Brazil.
Correct.
And so they just went back to Brazil and left their children. Like, is that how that works? No judgment. I'm just trying to understand the logistics of it.
No, that happens a lot. Happens more often where there's one of the parents that leaves. No, they get divorced. Divorce in the United States is 50%. So when someone gets divorced, you know, if they're on the West Coast and they have any kind of an Asian connection, you know, the husband or wife may go back to Asia. If they're on the East Coast, you know, go back to Europe or Canada. And in this case, you know, in the southern states, more than likely they're going to go to, you know, some place like Mexico, Guatemala, or, you know, as far south as, you know, Chile and in Brazil. So,
Okay.
you know.
So it just sounds different, I guess, because they've left the country, right? But I guess, you know, when you break it down like that, and again, it's one of those things that, you know, I love these sort of brain things that happen for me, and I encourage other people to explore it as well. But it's that I don't even think about it so much when a parent moves from one side of the country to another and never sees their children, right? And so this goes to another country, and I'm like, oh, they left the country, but really, is it any different?
It really isn't. I mean, if you have, you know, a woman who's married to, you know, a guy, however they ended up coming together, and they divorce, where's her family? Well, that's where she, you know, she goes. And guys do the same thing. We go back to our family, so it's not a, you know, a sexist thing. It's just whatever we're familiar with. If we're in a place where we don't have any friends, and I'm sure all of us have got one friend who has gone someplace, there was no one there, and they said, you know what? It was a nice city, but there was no one there. I didn't know anyone. I didn't seem to connect with anyone. They come back.
Yeah. So you found these parents, and what happened?
Well, at this point, you know, we turned the information over to the agency. So at this point, we really have stepped back out of it. You know, the success was that we did find the parents, and that was our first case in Brazil. So, our charity is able to go into a country and to be successful very quickly. And again, that's in part because of my background, the background of the people that work with us and here in the charity, that we have people who are bilingual, trilingual, who have different cultural backgrounds, who know how to interact with government agencies. That's a skill in and of itself. How to communicate in a different language. So it takes all of that together to make us successful in finding these people. And I do want to say this also. We're able to do this work because we have got some wonderful donors. We are completely donor supported. We do not get money from businesses. We get money from our donors who give generously and allow us to do this work and to have it funded fully by our donors. So it's regular people who have a family, go to work, and have their own business, that are pitching in and are making a difference for these children, because we're just a conduit. We're just the ones doing the work, but it's the donors who are allowing us and funding us so that we can make this happen. So, the congratulations really goes to those donors who support us for this particular case and support us for all the cases that we handle.
Yeah, that is so cool that they're out there, that people that care beyond what's right in front of them. So if people are listening and they want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, what you're doing, what's the best place for them to go?
Facebook. Facebook is a wonderful place. We're on Facebook, so it's facebook.com/family finding MX, like Mexico, Mexico X-ray, family finding MX.
Okay.
So if they go there, we post every day. If they want to give, that's wonderful. If they want to do a fundraiser, that's great. If they want to ask questions about how to be a foster parent, we answer everyone who, we have people ask us, how do I become a foster parent? What do I do if I want to adopt? What can I do to help support a child? We get questions from everybody. We're very active about it. We've got 14,000 followers, and we do everything we can to answer and give them information. So we appreciate that they're asking, and we've tried to be a resource for people who have questions about how can we help a foster child.
I love it. I love what you're doing. I love the fact that it's just, it's beyond what the average person may think of doing to help and assist. And so it's so great. Anybody, it will be in the show notes, the link to the Facebook page, and the show notes will be on Domino Thinking with the link to this interview. And so anybody who's listening that didn't have a chance to write it down, go to my website and you'll be able to find it. So before we leave, Richard, first I want to thank you so much for being here. But is there sort of something that you can, like a Richardism that you can, wisdom from you that you can leave people with?
What I would leave people with is, for these children who go into foster care, there's a lot of pain. They're innocent. They have not done anything that has caused them to be taken from their parents. Just parents and adults acting badly. So we have these children who are in a lot of pain in foster care. The wonderful thing, though, is that there are solutions. Just the work that my charity is doing, it helps to get them out of foster care and get them into a forever home with loving, caring people. That's the goal, and that's our mission, is to do that. And that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what I think about when I go at night, is that we are changing the lives of a child every time we find a relative, every time we close a case like this, that child's life is going to change positively for the rest of their life because we were able to do this, whether it's they go back to their parents or they end up getting adopted. Somehow, some way, they're going to get out of foster care and have a better, brighter future.
Well, I love what you're doing, and I just appreciate you so much for taking this time. I love the learning experience. I love being able to look at things differently, and I hope our listeners have the opportunity to do the same, because there's so much going on in the world that we just don't know anything about. And having people come and share, I just feel so honored. So thank you so much for, one, being here, and two, doing what you do.
Well, you're very welcome. I appreciate those questions. They're great questions, and I can't wait to hear this myself. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you. So there we have it. Yet one more thing that we can think about, that just getting outside of ourselves long enough to consider the experience of somebody else. I think if we can all start doing that just a wee bit more, the world will just be a much better place. We are so self-focused, and it's becoming more and more and more like that. And I think while inside we have to look internally so that we can gain strength and be solid and not be easily swayed, and we can understand what it is that we believe in, we also get to then look outside of ourselves to see how we are contributing to the world around us. And hopefully it'll be in a good way. I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at dominothinking.com. And in the meantime, if you don't question something, what is the point of believing in it?